The FF series is an online reinvention of the League's in-person First Friday receptions, tours, and project reviews. Like First Fridays, these programs provide the opportunity to both see recent and current projects, as well as to get a sense of the studio culture, to see where and how firms are working. Today, this will include a preview of how Lake Flato is currently reconceptualizing and redesigning their studio in ways that will exemplify the environmental concerns that are at the heart of their practice. This presentation responds to the 2021-22 series focus on design practices that are redefining the public landscape by responding to social and environmental concerns and exploring the intersections of architecture, technology, and ecology. Today's program will be introduced and moderated by Kathleen McGuigan, Editor-in-Chief of Architectural Record. Kathleen, who was formerly architecture critic and arts editor of Newsweek, has held a Loeb Fellowship at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, been a Poynter Fellow at Yale, and has taught at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. She currently serves on the board of directors of the Skyscraper Museum and is a trustee at the AIA New York Center for Architecture. Following the presentation and Kathleen's conversation with Ted, Adriana, and Matt, the discussion will be open to all attendees, at which point we hope that you will turn your cameras back on. Please keep them off, as well as your microphones during the presentation. You can pose your questions in the chat section, and if you feel comfortable doing so, we invite you to ask them in person. Before we begin, a quick thanks to the League sponsors. This program is supported in part by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, as well as by the League's members, whose annual support makes all of our programs and events possible. Please visit archleague.org for further information about membership and the League's upcoming events, such as the Emerging Voices series launching next week, as well as past programs. Finally, towards the end of the program, information will be posted in the chat section for those seeking CEUs. Kathleen.
Hi, Anne, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today to introduce Lake Flato. I first met Ted Flato 20 or 30 years ago. We were trying to figure this out when he drove me around some beautiful Texas country to look at a couple of houses his firm had designed for an article I was writing at that time on regional modernism. That term had always been a bit of a backhanded compliment, but at that time, American architectural culture was changing, and the practice that Ted had founded in 1984 in San Antonio with his partner, David Lake, was really in the forefront of a renewed appreciation for the architecture of place, of modern design rooted deeply in the particulars of context and landscape, of local culture, history, and materials. It was a set of values that led naturally for Lake Flato to the ethos of sustainability that's come to define the firm's work. That sensitivity in its most basic aspects is one that responds to the direction of the sun and the prevailing breezes, the seasons, the weather, topography, all things which mankind had known for millennia how to respond to in building shelters, but which somehow we lost touch with for much of the modern era. And I think architects like Lake Flato have been central to bringing that back in the last few decades. Ted is a son of Texas, born in Corpus Christi. He studied architecture at Stanford, where he was strongly influenced by the architect William Turnbull, whose own powerful sense of place is probably best expressed in the work he did at Sea Ranch with Charles Moore, Donald Linden, and Richard Whitaker. Ted returned to Texas and connected with his founding partner, Lake, when they both worked at Ford, Powell, and Carson, an office founded by a legendary regional modernist of an earlier generation, O'Neill Ford. Lake Flato's brand of place-based architecture has been widely honored in Texas and nationally. In 2004, the office was named the AIA Firm of the Year. Many of their projects have received COAT and major sustainability and design awards, including one of the 11 AIA Architecture Awards this year for the Marine Education Center at the University of Southern Mississippi. Besides institutional projects, the office is especially well known for its residential work, which is explored in their latest book, Lake Flato Houses, Respecting the Land. The firm has an office in Austin, as well as its home base in San Antonio, with a total of 140 in staff these days. And as Anne said, for his talk today, Ted will be joined by two associate partners, Matt Wallace and Adriana Swindle. And do please remember to put your questions in the chat during their presentation. So now, welcome and take it away, Ted.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Anne, and thank you all for joining us today. Kathleen and I first met at the time I came to New York to do the Emerging Voices talk, and that was some 30 plus years ago. So this is full circle, and it's exciting to have Kathleen part of our program today. And as I mentioned, we've got my two partners, Matt Wallace and Adriana Swindle, who have been very, very integral in the planning of our new office spaces.
Hey everybody.
I want to say hey.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here with you today.
Okay. So I, first of all, I want to, this is exciting for us to be part of this great tradition of visiting offices the first Friday of every month. We're going to wanted to share. Our offices are currently in renovation, and they're very much informed by these past few years. We started the renovation or the planning of the renovation right when COVID swept in. And so the ideas of remote learning, the remote working and collaboration, the importance of collaboration, and then all informed by our very landscape-centric form of design is driving this new direction in the office that we're looking forward to sharing with you, because we think it's something that we're all wrestling with as we're thinking about returning, to our office spaces after this kind of long hiatus. But I wanted to give you a little background on Lake Flato. Thank you, Kathleen. That was quite a wonderful introduction to us, and it's just very, very lovely words. Thank you. So I'm going to begin with just a little background on the early work. Lake Flato's design philosophy is very much informed by where we grew up. The big range of landscapes and environments of Texas, from the Gulf Coast to the central part of the hill country, which is where a lot of the rivers come up out of the ground, to the wide open plains of West Texas. You can advance to the next, to the shady, wet, areas of East Texas. So a really big range of landscape experiences, environmental conditions, and go to the next. And then all, screaming for different solutions to those different environments, and the vernacular architecture of those particular places is indicative of those different kind of solutions. And then also informing our architecture is the great solutions in other parts of the world of dealing with their particular environments. So go to the next, thanks. And the work began, it was just David and me, and we had the opportunity, very, very lucky opportunity to get to explore the regions of Texas through these very simple, modest projects that had a large landscape component. There were projects out in the country like this one that were more porch than house, as we like to say. And go to the, and the goals for our clients on these projects were to connect directly to the environment. And really, as we would say, style took the back seat. It was about thinking about how the environment should shape the buildings, how we would use the materials and craft from a particular area that would then inform the architecture. And now we continue to do houses. They're a big part of our, they're probably 20 or 30, 20% of the work that we still do. And as Kathleen alluded to, we have a new house book that Rizzoli has just kind of showed up at the bookstores right now. And I wanted to share with you a video that kind of talks about our houses and our design philosophy that informs those houses.
The landscape has always been part of Lake Flato's ethos. It began with early projects that were projects in the country, which I always like saying that where style took a back seat, because the goal for those early clients was to connect to the place where they were building. And so we drew inspiration first from the landscape, the environment, where the wind was, how to work with it, how to build outdoor spaces that would be comfortable in that place. It was way before even the word sustainability was out there. It was just about allowing our clients to be part of that environment.
Each place comes with a certain history, a certain topography, a certain weather pattern. There are things that are sort of intrinsic to that location, that place. And these might seem like obvious things, but they're the beginnings, the sort of threads with which we'll weave a narrative about what it's like to experience a piece of landscape. The landscape is going to give us big moves. It's going to tell us which way the building wants to face and where the big open spaces are and where the more cloistered spaces are. And then we take all of that information, we begin to build a series of spaces at a loose level. It's kind of a sketch. And from there, we refine those ideas into something physical, something architectural, spatial.
You look at the project that we did in Marfa, and they're a big, wide open landscape, mountains at a distance, but this prairie, incredibly beautiful grass and the light on it, just remarkable. But if you were standing out in the middle of that, you'll be cooked. How will you really appreciate this remarkable landscape? In that house, you come through a smaller space, a roof, and it's slowly shading you down. And you don't enter a room first, you enter the courtyard first. And the courtyard isn't a fully enclosed courtyard. It's a courtyard that's connected to those amazing views.
On Bridge House, what's really unique is that we sited the home across this ravine that bisected the property. It's all part of this natural ecosystem that in this highly developed industrial city of Houston that still has this connection to nature. And so when you entered this site, you were on the other side of that ravine, and you're welcomed by a very long pedestrian bridge that crossed this ravine in this natural, lush kind of valley landscape. And the experience of kind of crossing that bridge transports you from that urban, busy lifestyle to a slower paced respite from the city.
In the case of the project that we did on the North Fork of Long Island, it was a house perched on this amazing big sand dune adjacent to the Peconic Bay. There, we wanted a room that would work both in the summer and the winter, that would feel like it's part of the outdoors at all times of the year. And so what that meant was a room that doesn't have big overhangs, and the glass goes floor to ceiling, and then the room is not deep. So you're getting great daylighting on both sides of the room. So you're very intimate with where the sun patterns are changing. The idea is thinking of buildings as really almost temporary. The landscape is preeminent. It's where beauty really is derived from. And if you can leverage the land and the environment the experience in the building is just that much richer.
So it was a natural evolution from those early houses in the landscape to these environmental learning centers that we got early in our career, and we were able to hone our design philosophy that architecture ought to be shaped by the environment. Like this project that was along the coast, along the Rio Grande, it's called the World Birding Center. It was all about creating these oases for first insect populations and then birds. Go to the next. And then another education learning center that was focused on the recharge area of the Edwards Aquifer that's so critical to the water for central Texas, and showing how to build lightly on the land and the importance of the preservation of that land. And then these opportunities to work all over the country. This one, the most recent one, is on the coast of Mississippi, education center there. And finally, to go to the next, to one of my favorites, which is just in our own backyard, which is Confluence Park, which is education center along the banks of the San Antonio River. And the San Antonio River creates a long linear, probably 22-mile linear greenway from the southern end of the city to the kind of northern edges of the city. And it stitches together, this kind of somewhat sprawling, typical Western city, San Antonio. And this particular cultural institution is in a location in the southern part of the city where it's very much devoid of these kinds of facilities. So it was important to build this building, one, in that location, but number two, to create a building that starts to inform those who visit about the importance of the recharge zone and how the aquifer works, and just the entire restoration of the San Antonio River. And so I want to share this video on Confluence Park, and so thank you.
The River Foundation knew from the beginning that we really wanted to make a significant investment in a Southside park.
It's called Confluence Park because it's located at the confluence of the San Antonio River and San Pedro Creek. And those waterways are really important to the history of San Antonio. They've supported life here for over 13,000 years.
We started talking about, well, what would happen if we had a park where the novel concept was that it was a park where you went when it rained. Instead of going to the park on sunny days, here's a destination where when it's raining, something interesting is happening because of the way water's funneling off of the pavilion and the way water's being captured.
I wanted to be able to integrate that flow of water into the project, and had this idea of creating these funnels that would funnel the water down from the sky down into the cisterns. And when we started approaching that problem of how do you create these funnels, I looked to nature for inspiration.
If we can impart the stewardship where we learn to be better neighbors, not just within our own little neighborhood, but of the whole river system, and to think that way, and understand that our neighbors north of us on the river, we need to have a dialogue with them, because what they do affects us.
And with that premise of stewardship comes the responsibilities of looking at the environment, looking at ecology, looking at the nature of natural resource management, and how do you tell that story? And the park is a manifestation of telling that story.
So while Lake Flato is primarily known for designing structures in Texas, as you just saw there with Confluence Park, it's important to note that our reach spans far beyond the border of Texas. I'm currently working on a project in Arizona, one in Nebraska, Chicago, Pennsylvania. And on top of that, we work with all different project types beyond residential and visitor centers. So we work on independent schools, we work on development work, commercial, civic and cultural, as well as higher education. But in the end here, it's really about the people that allows us to work within these different project types and different climates and contexts. You know, and it's these people that work that make everything better. And so here's an image, first image of our office. This is in San Antonio, Texas. And I think it's fair to say that in addition to our collective infinity for the landscape, the essence of Lake Flato also lives within the people working collaboratively together. And it's a people first mentality. And just a story, when I came to Lake Flato for the first time 16 years ago, you walk in the lobby and the first thing you see is not images of buildings or even images of landscapes. You see an image of the people who come together to create these wonderful structures. And that really, in my mind, set it apart as just a people first mentality. So this mural on the right that you see is actually a retreat that we go on every year called Flato. And I just found this out just seconds before, Ted, that I didn't realize Flato was derived from a mistyped letter that we got 30 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I just learned that before we've been talking about this. But what's fun is that how long have we been doing this for, Ted? I mean, 30 years, a long time.
Yeah. It was the natural thing to do. David and I would always go out there and talk architecture. And so it was a natural, once we started the office, that we would continue that tradition.
So you can always see where Ted is. He's the guy holding up his wide brim hat in all these photos. But what's really important about this experience outside together is it sets the tone for how we think about our buildings and how we engage with the landscape and just come together. So we try to take the spirit of this weekend and apply it to the everyday when we get back to the office. And so it's this way of thinking that we are trying to bring into how we work together, but also how we create an environment, which will be our new office of the future. So we wanted to just share a small snippet of what it feels like to be here on this weekend.
The idea was, let's go out to the country and not really talk about architecture, just enjoy each other. And spend 2 nights together playing in the river in the hot time of the year and bring husbands and wives and kids. And that's how it all began.
In the beginning, it was a small cookout, 5 or 6 guys, and we just had a blast.
Now in all 3 houses, and we're scattered all over the place and in tents, and it's grown so much. It's an amazing tradition, and it's in a spot that's arguably one of the prettiest, most beautiful spots in Texas. Headwaters of the Nueces River bubble up out there, and it runs down for several miles, and it's an amazing piece of Texas.
You see the landscape that inspires Lake Flato's work, and you kind of see where that vision starts.
And it kind of takes us, I think, both back to our childhoods we loved about just making do in the environment.
Texas has always been a earth cooking heritage almost. Well, we dig a pit and build a fire in it. Put a couple of pans of water and then put a grill with the goats on it and then completely seal it off. And it just cooks slowly for 5-6 hours.
We're all together and relaxed, and it's just a really wonderful time for the whole office.
Everyone that comes here that's part of this firm has really great fond memories of being out on Ted's place. It's a great place to get to know people.
So the ethos Ted described and the culture Matt just presented really set the framework for how we approach the land, but more importantly, how we approach our project process. And because we value people's views so much and their experiences, our approach is really collaborative. And when we have the opportunity, we like to do it in the landscape if possible. And we really value designing the process just as much as we enjoy the final product. The priority we hold within the walls of the firm is really externalized to the broader project team when we're working on creating place. And we're really interested in listening, learning new things, and tailoring, to our clients' needs. We also want to thrive on how our perspective and philosophy and experiences can help shape their visions. But as the firm evolves, a primary goal is to bring the work to even broader audiences. How can we do that? There's always an inherent challenge that keeps us striving and curious. How can we take these amazing poetic core values that Ted described and really bridge them from the micro scale to urban contexts and wider typologies? So we're thrilled to show you one example of the Austin Central Library where we're tackling this challenge as Austin's living room.
We had lofty ambitions. We wanted to build the library of the future. We wanted to build significant architecture that would be a destination for our community and for tourists from near and far.
The library really is more than just a building. It's really this hub of Austin that brings community together, but also shares knowledge, shares culture, shares the spirit of the city.
We really all felt like we were working together to collaborate. I've never experienced that many people that were able to bring so many different ideas to the table.
Early on in the design process, we went and really thought a lot about libraries and what it means to be a library in the 21st century.
Given the site on the Lady Bird Lake and Shoal Creek, it was this opportunity to engage the natural realm as well as to engage the streetscape.
We really wanted it to embody that spirit, and so the building literally bridges between the nature and the technology.
We used daylight modeling and energy modeling to craft the actual shaping of the building. Bringing daylight into the building by cleaving the building in half and allowing the light to slide down 5 stories into the building created a building that was very balanced in daylighting and also makes it intrinsically welcoming.
We set fairly lofty floor-to-floor heights for this building so that we could get our windows higher up so that we could drive daylight further into the building. And then obviously the largest move we did was this large 6-story tall atrium that really is tuned with different skylights to drive light far down at the building.
So now we wanted to talk about our office space and how all of these ideas have informed our thinking. You can see in the center of this image, our offices are right downtown. They're just a block north of the Alamo. So that's the Alamo just below it, which is that kind of larger open green space. And we moved into this old industrial building almost about a year after we began the office. So it's been pretty close to almost 40 years that we've been in this space. This was an old car dealership. and cars were stored on the different floors. It's built in 1920, and it's built like a parking garage. And so it was a kind of an ideal kind of space to get to work on. It was also an ideal early project. It was our very first adaptive reuse. We were paid in a small percentage of ownership in this new building. Go to the next shot. And if you advance, if you would. Yeah. And it's now been our home, for all these years, and we over time we kept growing, and so we ultimately ended up taking over the entire building, and it's really served our needs really beautifully. But the office has grown a lot since we began with just 5 or so people, and now we're 120, and so. But we love this location. So the challenge is just how could we actually stay in this same footprint? We could, and all the things that have happened to us over the last couple of years have helped inform us that we could do that. We could actually stay in a smaller footprint and still be really successful and still enjoy this great location in the center of the city. And adaptive reuse from this project then has morphed into huge, really large urban scaled adaptive reuse. Like the Pearl was one of our very first, this is in San Antonio, just about a mile from our office, just upstream along the San Antonio River. And we're now doing a number of projects like this in Austin. We just finished a big downtown transformation in the kind of just south of the downtown area along along Congress Avenue, and then in Portland. But when we approach these projects, it is with this very much landscape-centric view of thinking about the outdoor spaces as just as important spaces as the indoor spaces, and thinking often that buildings are just the framework for creating these outdoor rooms. And collaborating, we don't have a landscape department. We think within our office, we think very much about the landscape, but we're smart enough to know that we really need people who that's what they do for a living, landscape design. So in this particular project, we were collaborating with 3 different landscape architects. One, SWA, who specializes in rivers and floodways. Our local landscape architecture firm, Rialto, who's was great. People on the ground, and then Christy Tenike, who had had offices in Phoenix and is now in Austin, and we often work with her in many of our projects in Texas. So I wanted to walk you through a video of the Pearl, and then we'll get back into talking about our building here a little bit more.
City design is about making our existing urban cores better places to live, more dense, true destinations, authentic, building upon the character of the fabric of the built environment. You have to move beyond just that one architectural gesture and think about the collection of the entire whole. And in the case of Pearl, that was a 30-acre site, about 15 blocks of new construction and old construction that has become a catalyst for San Antonio.
They reached out to me and said, "Hey, Bill, we want you to come look at this real estate with us because we think might be a good investment." It was a part of town that had been passed by with the growth of suburban development. And the river at the time was not developed. It was a creek. And I told them, look around. There's nothing about this that speaks of opportunity. This is the kind of investment that you run away from.
And he decided he had to buy it. And he purchased it. And it was like, well, now what? It was a real opportunity to think about how do we make a district? Why do people come to a place? And how do we repurpose all these great historic buildings? And we had many charrettes with Pearl and the community to suss out critical aspects to Pearl. What would bring people to Pearl? What was the purpose of Pearl?
And out of that started to coalesce some interesting ideas, connecting the property back into the community. In addition to physically connecting it to the community, it was about connecting it to the community viscerally, where it felt like the part of the neighborhood. Ideas started to coalesce around food and how food might be the centerpiece of the development. Primary decision was to make Pearl about and for San Antonians.
So those experiences, getting to do these wonderful urban spaces where landscape plays a big role in their success, certainly has informed our most recent thinking about our own building. This is a shot from the street, and the little building to the right is where, up until recently, that's where we've been parking our cars. And it was also an old kind of car dealership or car workspace. And so it was, it had bays facing, it worked. And we've been using it in a variety of ways. I mean, we'll pull the cars out and we'll sometimes have these wonderful, gatherings that our existing building couldn't handle. And then it dawned on us that, and especially with this idea of so much of what we've learned of late about, the great things that you can do in remote working, but how important it is to have these marvelous collaborative spaces. And we've been using, these are both shots of some of the outdoor spaces at the Pearl. And we've been using those over the last couple of years for our own gatherings. And we thought, well, why not have one of these spaces of our own? Why not take those cars out of that space and turn it into a great courtyard? And that's what we're doing. So currently the roof is coming off of this building. We're going to recycle part of that roof to create kind of half of a roof, fill it with trees and planting, so that when you walk through the wall, that is this one-story building, you walk through that wall, you close the door, you're now in a courtyard, and suddenly the noise of the street goes away. You now hear the sound of birds. It's a completely transformative space that will ultimately be really our outdoor living room for our building. And this will allow us to, we're going to be moving back into the office where it'll be a bit like musical chairs. You'll be changing desks depending on what day you're there, and you'll be working with different people right adjacent to you. And there won't be enough chairs when the 120 all want to show up all at the same time. And when that does happen, this outdoor space will accommodate that expansion and that larger population. And it just means that, when it's one of those days where everyone is showing up, and then it means that you're either wearing a coat or wearing shorts, and so you dress accordingly. So Adriana, you want to talk a little bit about, our philosophy of what we're thinking about in the interiors.
Yeah, and so even though we technically are playing our own client, what better place to look for inspiration than our projects? So as we develop our aspirational concepts and thinking about the next generation Lake Flato office space, we really look to projects that have evolved around the human experience. And we've talked a lot about how much people matter and how invested we are in hearing the feedback from all of our peers and understanding how to create the optimal workspace. So we focus on how daylighting components can really have positive effects on mood, and really the space that you work in, and creating places where people want to be, and how biophilia, bringing the landscape in or providing a means to connect to those views, is really key in the place where we all feel the next generation Lake Flato wants to trend. And of course, every time we think about a workplace, we think about the building of community, which we have a very strong Lake Flato community. And how can we do that in various ways, outside, or create spaces where people can get away from their desk and create a moment of respite, getting some background noise, and other locations where we have informal gathering spaces where we all come together and really hear about a lunch and learn, or we can collaborate in an informal setting. And of course, those result in tangible design concept opportunities, like all the buzzwords, of course, like flexibility, as we use one space for many reasons, but it's always based around how the cultural response to our people is really influencing the functionality of that space. And because we like to use one space for many reasons, we like to think about flexibility as being an integral part of the next generation like Flato. And also the many ways that we collaborate. As Ted mentioned, we all do really enjoy working in the landscape. So providing those opportunities where we can achieve that is key. And of course, focused opportunities of enclosed spaces where we have more closed door meeting applications. And then, interacting in the open office work environment is something that people would previously all do at their desk, but now we're embracing the idea of doing it out in the open more often in an organized way. And this mix of workplace typologies really lends itself to celebrating the different ways that people enjoy working. Because let's face it, not all of us are effective working in the same way. So not all of us are as effective working at a desk all day long. So some of us need quiet space and others need sort of a mixture of activity and interaction. And maybe some people want to hang out couching and work on their laptops all day. And so Matt is going to take us through a little peek of how we're implementing these aspirational concepts.
And before we show you this little snippet, that's kind of, before we show you this, you've heard from us on the thinking of what we're doing. We want to show you behind the scenes, sort of live, a couple weeks ago, what's going on, boots on the ground. We have shovels in this space under construction. And so we're going to go through and show you kind of the construction really quickly and then transition to more of a rendering, a video, a fly through of what it's going to be when we're complete. So this is the courtyard space here, removing the concrete before the roof comes off. And then to zoom around here, that's 3rd Street. That's how you would traditionally come in. And then this will be our new front door and space. So everything, studs going up right now. And then this is the courtyard space itself, moving in to it. With the slow, really, that we call the courtyard space our living room. It's going to be like Flato's living room. And then more open spaces as you enter. In the past, if you would have seen this a few years ago, you would have seen a lot of desks here, permanent desks, and walked through a space with people working at their desk and not sort of a more informal space as you see now. It's also important to note that on the left side of this, and we'll get to the site plan here in a moment, there'll be a really large kitchen that you're able to spill out into the courtyard or into this space as well. So here's an image of from a few years back, actually, of when we were thinking about designing this space, and it was really fun. It was, if you can imagine, a whole bunch of architects getting together, breaking up into 5 or 6 people, and only having an hour to play around with these little blocks. It was like for any of those who watch Top Chef, it's a little quick fire challenge we did one day to get all these ideas out on the table. But the thread that weaved all of these different iterations together was actually the green space. People took clumps of green paper and just threw them here and there. And the question was, where do we want to be outside? So what we did from here is, in thinking recently about our future of work, it's really important as an office to engage everybody, just like we would do for any design challenge on any project. We wanted to have these brainstorming sessions with everyone in the office. And so we had 18 different working sessions, both an hour long. I was in every one of these, and we really wanted to do it to where these sessions were groups of about 8 to 10, so everyone had a voice, making sure to moderate so those that aren't talking can have a voice. And there were a couple key takeaways that were actually interesting that we are going to incorporate into how we work together. Number one was, of course, there's always challenges with how we will come back together. And one being across the boards, top to bottom, people felt like their personal development has slowed. And there was one quote that was the most telling based on this challenge. And it was, the quote was, 90% of unscheduled interactions are done poorly. And so that idea that you have when you're together of accidental knowledge, of hearing somebody think through a design problem or talk through a tough situation with a client, that's not happening. On the flip side, though, there are opportunities that we never would have understood. One opportunity is that, do I dare say it, that remote work actually allows for better collaboration. And specifically, that has to do with design reviews. And Ted, you kind of said it best. I mean, it's interesting. You want to jump in here about why you think design reviews are better virtually?
Well, it used to be, you'd have 5 people in a room, and someone like me would be a bigger voice and would shadow others' voices sometimes. And but in a Zoom format, everyone had an equal, has an equal space, and it seemed like a real opportunity for much better contributions from all the different individuals. And yeah, no, we found that they've been more successful. They're efficient because you can line up a quick design review really quickly because you can schedule it by Zoom instead of having a room reserved and trying to round up everyone. But no, they've been, so yeah, to Matt's point, what we've been trying to do is trying to figure out, well, what things work in a remote setting and what things work in a more collaborative environment. So it's been a great time to wrestle with those issues.
So we just have a few more slides. I know we're running out of time a little bit for our Q&A session, but we wanted to walk you through our first floor plan and the site plan, and then show you some additional renderings. But in this site plan, again, the living room being the courtyard space, the space where everyone can get together from both offices and beyond. But then working towards the interior of this space, having more flexible spaces that allowed for interactions to occur informally. We didn't have a lot of these spaces prior. We had, 6 different studios, and each studio kind of had a different quadrant and a different floor. And so the mixing of how everyone comes together was important for this design. Anything, Ted, Adriana?
Well, I'll just say, Matt, that it's really a testament to our sort of overall strategy. And we realize that COVID has changed our view on work forever. So really thinking about now, it's not enough for us to create just a functional workplace. We have to create a destination for people to be, and really just looking at the proportion of the first floor plan versus our living room is a real testament to that.
I think to add to that, Adriana, that's something important for all these work sessions we had. We didn't ask, why, we asked the question, why would you want to come back to the office? And it changes the question from a to come back to a wanting to come back. And so we heard from everybody about what would excite them to come back to the office. And I think that's important not to lose touch on as we move forward.
Here's some additional views of the rendered office space we're anticipating, really showcasing this bridging of interior and exterior connectivity.
Again, another rendering of the space as you enter, looking out into the courtyard. And then making sure on different floors you have that those same interactive qualities on the first floor in the courtyard as you do on the second and third floor.
You probably wonder, where is all the desks? Well, there are, for the most part, the upper 2 floors are really, really efficient desks where no one owns their desk, and it's a bit of a musical chairs. We have studios coming in 3 days a week, overlapping at different times, sitting next to each other at different times. So a lot of cross-pollination and knowing everyone has the exact same desk. There are no private offices, obviously. So it's that all of these things, one of the things that we found during the past 2 years is, some of our work has been really efficient. You can work in a quiet way and a flexible way at home. Obviously we've been lacking this opportunity to have, direct collaboration. But one of the things that has been a challenge for us is because we work in a variety of areas, what we call our studios. We have these 5 studios, and there's been more siloization of the studios because those are the people that they're working with and tend to be the ones that they're mainly Zooming with. And so a lot more isolation. And so what we're looking forward to with this new office space, and it soon will be completed here in the next couple of months, is breaking down all these barriers that have been that were already happening well before COVID. I mean, there was already that kind of siloization happening. So this idea of owning desks, also this whole sense of equity where everyone has the same space, and I can be sitting right next to an intern one day and another partner another. And so all of those things are going to be incredible opportunities in our new space that we look forward to talking a little bit more with you about.
So the last slide here is just to, in the end, the office needs to be this sort of environment where you can come together and interact. And it's just so important as we get larger to have these spaces where you get to know people and have the spirit of Flato hold true on a daily basis at the office.
So maybe we'll bring Kathleen in and get a discussion going, and hopefully you're all still there, and so we look forward to having questions from the audience and just discussing the whole idea of workspaces.
Well, hello, that was really impressive. And I was actually planning at first to talk about your design, but I'm so intrigued by the workplace. I think we should dive right in there. I also want to make a correction, Ted. You seem quite sure that it's small. It's just between us. That the first time we met was in New York when you were an emerging architecture firm. And I remember so strongly you're taking me to these incredible houses like the Carraro house. It doesn't matter. It was all a good beginning a long time ago. But, it's very intriguing. I just want to start saying about Lake Flato or Flake Lato is you guys really raised the bar on the office party. I mean, I think anybody watching from any other firm is going to go, darn, we don't get a weekend on the water. We don't get all these kind of parties. You guys are doing a really good job with this. There already are a couple questions in the chat, though. It's interesting how, and you've designed a space that will evolve. I mean, we're post-COVID, sort of. It's a very radical thing you've decided to do. And I wonder how much buy-in there was for the idea. Somebody asked this in the chat, and I think it's a good question. How much buy-in is there to the sort of hot desking? I mean, that you only come in with your laptop, but you don't, you no longer have anything else on a desk. That's okay. You don't necessarily need a photo of your dog or a koosh ball or something. But I mean, what about, the sense of place is one thing. The other thing I wanted to ask, I've got about 3 questions here. Don't you ever use paper? Is there any trace left? Do you ever save drawings? Where's the library? Where's the materials library? Sort of just asking, because there is a physicality to making architecture that is different when you're working remotely.
So I think that Matt, you want to tackle the whole hot desking idea?
Yeah, what's really interesting, we asked this in all of our sessions, and there are definitely extremes on, but in general, there were 2 very eye-opening experiences from these conversations. The first one was a gentleman who had worked at Lake Flato for 5 years, 3 years pre-COVID. And that person said he would come in. His studio was sort of right after you entered, sit down, do his work, sit amongst the same people. And he was sort of a heads down, work, get everything done, and stand up and leave for the day. And we have a temporary office now, actually, where we're experimenting with these, hoteling and everything. And this person said, if you would have asked him a year ago if hoteling, he would say, no, do not want that at all. He said in the first 2 months of going to our temporary office space, he's gotten to know more people in 2 months in a temporary space than the 3 years prior. That he got to understand all the different project types going on within the firm much better than he did when he was in his studio. And so he was just so enthusiastic. So we have the opportunity to have a temporary space to actually flesh out a lot of these things before our office starts. Now, coincidentally, on the flip side of that, on the other extreme, you have to understand those who are more introverted. And so we had a woman say that, while that's great, this was actually in the same work session. While it's great for some, this person would feel a little more anxious to come in to have to talk to somebody new every day and sit next to somebody new. And so you have to sort of find where the needle is and try to experiment that way. So just interesting sort of anecdotes just from talking to everybody in the firm.
Well, I have to assume that, aren't I, that, and everybody listening to this, that you are going to experiment. I mean, there can't be a set way. You've designed a very flexible space, and you're actually going to begin to see what works and what doesn't. A few years ago, pre-pandemic, I was in the new office of Kieran Timberlake in Philadelphia, which interestingly is in a beer bottling plant. So it makes me think of the Pearl, a redone beer bottling plant. And they do a thing where every couple, all the desks are on wheels. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they were doing it then. All the desks are on wheels, and literally every week or two, they regroup people in terms of what projects there are, and you move your desk. So you're physically in another part of the space with your desk, but in a new configuration of people based on the project you are most engaged in or going to be. That was intriguing. You're doing something interesting because it's both project-based, but it's also human nature based, and you're trying to be flexible. You may have moms who want to stay at home certain days of the week. I don't know what all your, human resources issues are, but, you're trying for the ultimate flexibility. But it is interesting because you're also about placemaking, and now the placemaking isn't, nobody has their own bed, as it were, their own bedroom, their own stuff. Has anybody complained about that?
A little bit. I think that people are excited to test the new waters, but let's face it, architecture can be junky, right? And people like their stuff. So I think we're trying to, of course, like most, go digital with a lot of our records, but we do still drown in piles of trace paper. So really cleaning all of that up and encouraging people to have less and really manage their things is something we're looking forward to. But there have been some naysayers, and it's a cultural shift, I think, for all of us. And Matt, you're going to say?
Yeah, so I think the second part of the answer, which is really important, which I've been seeing in the chat, is just how will that work? And again, it's experimenting. We have lucky enough to have the Austin office, which opened right before COVID hit. And so this is a new office space with these ideas. So what we're doing there with hoteling is we actually have bins, and we have small bins and larger bins. And so the smaller bins are for people's personal items, and they live on a shelf. And so at the end of the day, you just take your stuff off of your desk and put it in the bin. And then we have larger bins that are project-based bins that for huge rolls of paper that the project teams can share. And what we found out there is that people started getting frustrated based on how far the bin was away from their desk. Really interesting. It's like you have like a 20-foot radius before someone just says, you know what, I'm just leaving my stuff on the table. And so we're getting to experiment with the Austin office on a small scale and then implement it at 311. So we're pretty lucky to have these these different areas to experiment.
You have a laboratory in Austin, but I was going to ask that when you talked about the bins. It reminds me, it's like you got a cubby in kindergarten, but you don't get your own desk till first grade, but you've got a place for your stuff. You guys will figure it out, but we'll be very interested in following it because it's a question that we have been asking a lot of firms, and you're doing it for reasons of a philosophy for working, but you're also doing it for a realistic reason, which is that you've got a lot of work and your personnel is surged and you're trying to figure out how to accommodate a lot of architects, each with different needs, and maybe at a different stage of their project. So I think this will be interesting. A lot of architects are telling us they want people back in the office, but on the other hand, all those big firms, they've been doing remote for years because they've got offices in 5 cities or 3 continents, or, so we're all learning. I wanted to ask if you are preparing to do meetings in terms of the technology, do hybrid meetings where some people will be in the office and some people will be remote, but you're basically all sitting around the same table on the same project.
Definitely. I think Zoom's here to stay. Right? If the pandemic's taught us anything, it's to be transient, but it's to be nimble. And I think that one thing, and Matt could probably elaborate on this a little further, is that, any meeting that we have really does need to be set as a Zoom as well, just to allow for that flexibility.
Yeah. One thing I'm really intrigued with, and it was very, beautifully done as you all put together this presentation, is this kind of transition from the firm's roots in domestic architecture and the landscape to urban architecture that's institutional, or in you basically guys are designing a commercial office. And I think that's really, it's very intriguing because the houses were characterized by flexible spaces and indoor-outdoor spaces, and obviously the connection of the landscape. Climate of Texas helps a lot, or the climate of the Gulf Coast and other places you're working. Though you had a very nice picture of snow in your Peconic house, Ted. That was nice. And I can tell you we've had a lot of it because I've been out on Long Island. It's been very snowy winter. But, I think that I wish you'd talk about that a little bit, because I think it's a really intriguing thing, as I followed the firm for so many years, is how you took that idea, which was basically the first residential designs, more porch than house, and how you translated that to an urban setting. And I'm thinking less of the house in Houston, which is in a kind of idyllic urban, but totally sort of wooded area, and more about when you get to really in the city kind of projects. You've touched on it, but talk about that a little bit more. How do those ideas, and the sustainable ideas too, where you can't necessarily move the building to take advantage of the sun and the breeze?
Well, it's I think those more rural opportunities were pretty easy. They were you could spread out in a landscape. You could the goal of those projects were people were already ready to be part of the outdoors, and so you could get away with more outdoor space than indoor space. And then as soon as we started applying it to urban conditions or universities, or just in a variety of different new locations, the thread that continues and connects all those projects is just this the notion of leveraging the outdoors, and you can do it in a variety of ways. And so, as an example at the Pearl, thinking a lot about those outdoor spaces and how they would interact with the indoor spaces. And so those outdoor spaces are so critical, and they can be quite small, but very impactful in an urban setting. And so I think of our new office space as an example. It's a little, it's an outdoor room, but it will make our indoor experience, it'll transform our indoor experience. And we never had that before. Now we had windows out on the street, but now we're actually going to have a space and the kitchen is connected to that space. So I guess that I guess that would be a really good example of, kind of how it moves, where it went from kind of more of a rural approach to an urban approach. But the, a lot of that early work was very intuitive. And as the firm has developed, we've had the opportunity to put a lot more science to it. And so sustainability has been, a huge driver. And so it's suddenly now the connection to the outdoors can just be the access to great daylighting and building efficiency. And even the way we're doing our current office is we're packing in a whole lot more people than we've ever packed into the space. I mean, we're theoretically getting credit for having 120 people in a space that I think it used to feel crowded at 60. And what we're doing and how we're doing that is just that everyone's not supposed to be there all at the same time. And if they are, they're, either in the outdoor space or, but that's high level of sustainability, to have the same footprint when we were 60 to be at 120 and still make it work. And
well, also it's sustainable to not tear the building down and build a new one. So there's that. And as you did, I believe, in the Pearl complex, and here, I think it's interesting that you don't only build, but you take away. And when you take away, I was very struck again by the little house in Peconic that you talked about, that because if something is small, then you have light from all sides. And you can, if the room is small, you have much more light coming in, you see more of it. And so by taking away, you're bringing more light into your office, the existing indoor space, correct? You're helping. Oh. And so I think that idea of removing as well as adding is something that's interesting. I also think there's such an interesting thread between among your earliest projects, which is that Carraro house, which won a lot of awards, and how you basically took a barn form with a clear story, and you sort of replicated. And part of it is just the roof and the columns. I mean, this has been going on for what would you say now? I think you said 40 years. It's been going on for 35 or 40 years, a way of embedding these ideas. And you said intuitively, but as I was arguing in my introduction, I would say that is the best kind of sustainability, is that kind of sensitivity. And you all seem to have that very much from the get-go.
Yeah, I could add to that. And your question is really interesting about transitioning from a more rural setting to an urban setting. And I think the success of our urban projects is deeply rooted in the same understanding of design taking a back seat. So what does design taking a back seat look like in an urban environment? And specifically at the Pearl, it's knowing a building's place amongst its peers, amongst its adjacent buildings. So that historic 150-year-old brewery building, you just can't compete with that. So it's okay to design buildings that are more workhorse buildings that are there to create the spaces, more so than to live on as a standalone building themselves. And so it's knowing when to step off the gas, take a back seat, allow the other buildings to shine while yours are supporting building. It's okay for buildings to be workhorse buildings.
Yeah, and I think, we all are very much fans of historic preservation, but there is a kind of building that can be modified without, destroying some essential architectural historical integrity, and knowing when to do it. And there can be a difference of opinion, and when not is an ongoing interesting question. I'd like to encourage people to contribute to the chat, but there are already some interesting questions in here that I'd love to ask people. People are also talking, a couple of people are talking about, remodeling their own offices. I think we have a lot of architects on this Zoom, and they're talking about how one gentleman, Timothy Gordon, is saying that they've run into some of the same issues. They began a full remodel right before of their office before COVID. And now that we've moved in, our office staff has grown. We are already short on seats. I mean, we all know, by the way, that ironically, whatever else is going on that's horrible in this world, our economy is roaring and it's getting hard to, I know in New York, it's difficult for firms to hire people. So everybody's got more, they need more bodies than they have seats to put them in. So people are really experimenting in the way that you are. Somebody was asking also whether or not how the computers are working. Is everything, is laptop the only way to go, or don't you also need some of the beefier, high-powered desktops for certain kinds of renderings? And are those done at stations? How does that work? And while you answer that question, I'm going to plug in my computer before I go to sleep. But Matt or Adriana, could you talk about that, please?
Yeah, so Kathleen, we have a series, we all operate off really tablets, and we hook into sort of virtual machines that are all big box like old school structures. And the way our technology works is we sort of all remote into these and can have the power of rendering with that technology. And so we've been doing that since I want to say for the last almost 2 years now. And it's really worked. And so I see in the chat too, somebody asked about hot desking and how does that work? Well, as Matt mentioned, we do have quite a bit of opportunity with the Austin office and our temporary office to test multiple ways of being efficient and tying into an existing system and moving around and being transient. We can actually just come into the office, plug directly into a monitor, and we're ready to work. It doesn't take but 30 seconds to change stations. Matt, anything to add? Oh, go ahead.
What about when people are at home? Because you're expecting a full day's work from the people at home.
Oh, yeah. So we all have, we've done a really good job of getting all technology set up at home offices.
Okay.
With preferred monitor sizes and whatnot. And at the same time, with the same system at home, all we do is log into our virtual machines that are all set in a central location, and we work away. And it's really no different than being in the office and being at your home office.
So you invested in all of that early with people. You're not expecting people to sort of wing it with their own equipment or anything.
Absolutely not.
No, go. No, Matthew.
Well, you're hitting on a very critical issue, and that is technology, if it's not done well, will be the cause for people not wanting to come in the office. And so it's really important to have consistency among every station, as well as consistency for when they plug in at home, so that you can plug in and to completely understand how your system is going to work. So my system at home is exactly like the system at the office. Just unplug, plug in. There is hiccups, there will be hiccups, but we're smoothing everything out there.
I think it would be helpful for people listening to talk a little bit about how you decide who comes in when. And the reason I ask that is I do have some skepticism about in-person, the level of brainstorming, the level of collaboration and sharing when you're in person versus on Zoom. I can see what Ted says about the design reviews, that he's not sort of the king bigfooting if it's everybody's in their own little Hollywood square. I get that. But I also think the spontaneity and a certain kind of sharing is something that's very hard to replicate. So could you talk a little bit, because I do think, Ted, I think when we spoke earlier, you actually are bringing together people on projects on certain days. Is that correct? Is there an organizing principle here that encourages in-person collaboration when you're not all in the office, but some of you are?
Yeah. So first of all, we were trying to figure out, for efficiency's sake, what can you do better away from the office? But no question, we've been really hamstrung by not being able to be together in a collaborative environment. And so I remember when we first finally got back into this temporary quarters and started doing it the way we're planning on doing it, which is the following, where each studio has set days to be in the office. So there's, say, 5 studios, and so there's overlaps different overlaps with the different studios. And that way, you know that at least all the people who are located in San Antonio, now they're people that are representing, so that are in those studios that may be living still in Boston or Brooklyn or other places or Portland, and they'll have to remote in. But most of the people, the idea is it's mandatory to come into the office, and because it's only going to be a couple of days, and that way you can count on everyone being there. And then you have 2 studios or 3 studios kind of overlapping, and you're trying to get the people who are maybe working on projects to be relatively close to each other. And then so all of that, and the idea is when you're in the office, it's a boisterous, noisy space. We're trying to make it where you have to be a lot more organized, but you're trying to get the Zoom days, the times when you're Zooming with your clients or Zooming with remote consultants, we're trying to get those to happen on the days when you're not in the office, because we found that half the group in a conference room and half the groups on the Zoom just doesn't work that well. So, but it is, just as you just said, Kathleen, that it's incredibly wonderful to get together around a table with tracing paper still. And so that you can't reproduce in a remote setting, certainly not as well. And it's fun to have those differences. It's fun to have when you show up and have it noisy and crazy and all the things that were completely opposite experience. And so as Adriana and Matt were alluding to it, what we're trying to do is make the office something that you really look forward to coming to. And it is different than it used to be. I mean, there were days that you'd go, oh, I'm not sure I really want to go into the office today. And at least for a while, it's not going to be like that because we haven't been doing it. And so it's so special and so wonderful to just get away and see each other and get together. And you forget how marvelous, so many of these wonderful people that you get to work with. And even though you're seeing them all the time on Zoom, you are connecting and it does work well, but it's not the same.
It is not the same.
And then this cross-pollination opportunity where you're sitting next to someone and you're hearing what they're talking about, and suddenly, and it's a project that you haven't been connected to in quite a while, or it's a project that you should have been connected to, but they didn't know you should be connected to it, and all of those things. The advantage of mixing it up in a space is huge. We have these desks that they all look alike, but they all jack up, up high or drop down low. So there's a lot of dynamic aspect to the tables we have. And then we have these 2 huge monitors on each table. But someone like me doesn't really need any of those monitors because I don't know how to use them. And so I can plug in, out on the Courtyard and just use my laptop like I've always used it. And, but yeah, so these are, it's so fun to have the different opportunities of different work opportunities. Yes. Very bullish.
I think we're in a moment of real experimentation. I kept being amused during the pandemic when, one day the New York Times would say, people are more productive at home, studies show it. And literally like within a week, there'd be another study that's better when they're in the office. Now everything's going to be hybrid. And, this much vaunted, a lot of our ideas about work come from Silicon Valley, where, when some of these big tech companies were starting, they wanted everybody in the office 20 out of 24 hours. You got dog walking, dry cleaning, free food. But, some of those companies, they really seem to believe in the spontaneous interaction. I'm sure there's some of that, but what's interesting about the work of architects is that there's spontaneity, but it's more channeled and organized. So if you guys are really organizing around specific projects, specific problems within that project, I could see that could make for a very productive in-office day, right? The day you're all gathering and you're very focused on what it is that you're going to have to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you're valuing the opportunity to be together even more now that you've limited it to fewer days of the week. So you're valuing those those collegial opportunities. Yeah.
So what's interesting that we're trying to think about, Kathleen, is are there core days within the week where people should be coming in? For instance, you can imagine if one studio is Monday, Wednesday, the other studio is Thursday, Friday, then they don't interact. And so it's elongating the siloed effect. But what if the core days were Tuesday through Thursday with days on either side, where you would come in, and see everybody during those core days. And then the flex days are for people who just want to come in. So we're thinking about when we work at the office in terms of a minimum, not a maximum amount. Anyone can come in as much as they want, but there needs to be some sort of threshold where we're all together.
Yeah, that's what somebody was asking in the chat. Are you allowed to come in on an off day? Will you get thrown out? Do you have to show your card at the door? I also want to know, and we will wrap up soon. If anybody you want, if there's more. Okay, somebody's asking a question again. The flexibility of where you work in the office seems laptop centric. Not necessarily. You were explaining if you're working on a construction document set on a computer, it seems more typical these days to use a double monitor at a desk, which isn't so flexible. It sounds like you've got the capacity to do all of this, though.
We have monitors at every single desk, and it plugs in, and then it shows on the screen.
So just to wrap up, I'm a little less concerned. I think you've really, I think the technology question is really interesting. You've thought a lot. And I do think that you're kind of part of a grand experiment that is going to continue to evolve, your firm and others. But here's what I know, what I want to get from your office culture. If you guys give such great parties, do you have beer every night when your people come to the office, or once a week or once a month? How's that working?
We try not to have beer every night.
Okay.
But it was a staple at our office meetings and our what we call flake break, not flake Lido, but flake break. It's nice to have a little beverage and be responsible about it. But yeah, we not every night, Kathleen. Not every night.
Okay. But it seems like there can be some joy at being back together again. And certainly the next time when I begin to hit the road again, I'm certainly coming to San Antonio, and I look forward to being offered something when I'm out in your courtyard.
Definitely.
I just want to say again, it's a beautiful presentation and reminding us all again about why your work is so important and so beautiful, and why you've gained the national recognition for many years that you so richly deserve. It's a real pleasure. Ted, it's been great to follow your practice. It's lovely to meet you, Adriana and Matt, and continue onward. A lot of inspiration here today. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it back to Anne Rieselbach.
And a huge thanks to all of you, and to you, Kathleen, for a wonderful job moderating. I'm curious about who gets priority on working outdoors in those amazing spaces, because it just looks so wonderful. And I'm assuming they're all totally wired and ready to go too. It's just been fascinating thinking about that kind of big house, big roof, big space that envelops all the work from the get-go and all the way through. That is just so inspiring. So thank you all. And I'd like to remind everyone, same time next month, very different place. We'll be back in New York City with Terrain NYC and Stephen Tupu talking about his work. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you so
Kathleen.
much.
Thank you, Anne.
Bye, Ted.
Been a delight.
And Matt
Really
and
appreciate it.
Adriana.